you may not get to choose where you start, but you certainly get to choose if you run the race, if you finish it, and what position you finish in. Those are all things that you have in your control. And you got a lot of, especially nowadays, with the wealth of information and the ability to reach out and access people. I can be here in Dallas, and I can talk to somebody on the other side of the planet instantly. I can reach out to anybody I want to and talk to them and get, help. And not just even around trauma, but it's just, how do I go to college? How do I do this? How do I learn about finance? How do I take out a loan?
Any of my brothers that are out there, struggling with their deployment or, life in general, I tell them that, hey, to stay strong and to keep holding on and to understand, you're here for a reason, and that, your life and what you're doing does have purpose.
Hey everyone, this is Greg Washington, and welcome to another edition of Guards Down. I have with me today Nick Martin. How are you?
Hey, how's it going, Greg? Good talking to you.
Doing well. Nick, tell us about yourself.
Sure. So, as Greg said, my name is Nick Martin. I'm actually a fellow West Point classmate of his. So we both graduated in 2005. A little bit about me. So I grew up in a single family household, and, I've been one of those people that I think has really come a long way from, given the facts of where he started and being able to graduate West Point. Served in the Army a little bit before that. And then after my military service, got into the corporate sector, and now I work in software doing product management.
Awesome. Amazing. All right. Well, of course, we're getting into the topics of PTSD and complex grief. And one of the main goals is being able to talk about trauma and grief so that it can be normalized, right? So we can overcome those stigmas and people can feel connected and understood, when it comes to getting help, right? To let them know that, they're not alone. Normally want to start off with asking, like certain questions about like your background, right?
Sure.
I feel like trauma shapes who you are. It shapes your why. It shapes what you endure, personally, and also your transition into either a different life or career or whatever the case may be, right? So, just to start out, the first question is, do you feel like, in your childhood, you were taught how to handle and deal with PTSD and grief, or trauma and grief?
No, certainly not. And I think, thinking back through like some of my teen years and preteen years, that was a real struggle. So, definitely did not have the benefit of any kind of education or any of the things that you're doing right now, Greg.
Okay. All right. Well, in now being an adult and of course having those experiences, what have you learned about, trauma and grief and the coping mechanisms that you use to get through?
Certainly. Yeah. So, just, I guess, a little bit of background. When I was very young, my father left me and my mother, and then, he subsequently committed suicide. So, it was obviously a very, very traumatic thing to go through. And, as a young person, you didn't really have a lot of things to deal with it. And people would say, do you want to talk about it? Do you want to really, sit down and have a conversation? And when you're younger, you don't really fully grasp what that means, and you don't understand it until you get a little bit older, and then you kind of look at things, and being on the other side of it, now as an adult, and you kind of think through things, and you see like the loss of opportunity to sit down with, my father and ask him those questions and talk to him about certain things. So, that's something that, I think about. Back to your question about how do you deal with it now, I think there's a lot of things that, the way it shapes me nowadays is really around how I try to deal with other people and how I interact. It influences the way that I conduct even my job at work, where I really put a focus on, what's going on in that other person's head, and trying to think through, have a little bit of compassion for what it is that they're dealing with.
Yeah. Okay. So just to kind of break it down, what happened to your father, and of course, your family was very devastating. It was collateral damage, right, from his actions. And so it changed the whole family dynamic. It changed your life as far as, how you were going to grow up and be, kind of share, right, that collateral damage of, of his life being taken.
Sure. So, I think the immediate effects were, there was a couple of other things. My parents got divorced before this all happened. And, my mother ended up having to work 2 jobs and work very hard. But, there wasn't certainly that level of support or somebody to turn to and get any kind of guidance or direction. Somebody once said that, you're self-made in the truest sense of the word. Everything that I had to go do, I literally had to learn it on my own. And excuse me, I'm getting a little choked up, not because, certainly it was a sad event, but, I think about the things that I was able to accomplish and go, and achieve in spite of all those things. So, how do you deal with some of that, and the collateral damage? It certainly wasn't a normal childhood by, or your typical childhood, I guess. I was, I had to teach myself everything. I didn't have anybody to go to say, what should I do? Where's that guidance? How do I go from being a child to a man? I mean, even just little things like, learning to shave, who's going to teach me that? Who's going to teach me how to drive a car, sign a loan, apply to college, those kind of things. Those were all things that I just had to kind of teach on my own. So that's probably where you see like the biggest collateral damage is just everything that happens in that person's life after the fact. Whoever's struggling with this, that's what they're taking away from other people.
Right. Man, that I feel you. Just knowing what we went through at the academy, the struggles to get into the academy to start off, because you got to have good grades, you got to be athletic, you have to be a leader in your community and the whole nine. And so for you to have to grow up and become your own man, and you're exactly right, self-made, and to get to a point where, and of course, you mentioned that your mom is from another country, so the language barrier there, shoot, man, like you had to do it. And I mean, for me, my hat goes off to you even more, because I didn't know all of this, about you from before. And so just learning it and understanding what we went through, right, makes you appreciate, you and your friendship even more. And also, what you did as a leader for other soldiers and your family. Okay, so
Well, thanks, Greg. I appreciate that.
so to your point of, this collateral damage, it's two people that we're speaking to out here. One is the person that is thinking about committing suicide, and two is the folks surrounding them, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ones close. So for a person that has probably already been in your shoes, right? Let's talk to them first. What would you tell your younger self or someone that is in your shoes or currently going through what you went through?
Yeah, I think, the biggest thing is, and it's kind of two things that I've used a lot through, my entire career. It's influenced pretty much every aspect of my life. The first is the only non-renewable resource you have is time. So you can do a lot of other things. You can get more money, you can get more education, you can get more friends, you can do a lot of things. You can never get more time. It's very valuable. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things is, you've got that. The second thing is understanding the difference between what you can control and what you can't control. And really focusing on the things that you can control. Some people say, they like to use the analogy that, life is like a card game, right? And you don't get to choose, if you're sitting at a poker table, you don't get to choose the cards you're dealt. You just get to choose the way you play them. And I think that's very true. That's certainly true in my case. I didn't get to choose, my family situation or the background, but I could choose how I use that to move myself forward. And you can still achieve quite a bit. In some ways, I think you can actually use some of that trauma as a motivator to help you strive and do better. So, I think those are the things that I would kind of tell my younger self to offer encouragement.
Yeah, no, that's good. Understanding that your time is valuable, right? That you have, and to use it wisely, and to understand that you can only control the things within, your grasp, your actions.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely agree with that. To the person out there thinking about committing suicide,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just like, if you had the opportunity to, to talk with them, or, what would you tell them?
Yeah. So first off, I would say whatever it is that is driving you to think about that, it's cliche, but there really is nothing that big that really can't be overcome, whatever the problem is. It may only be, it really is that permanent solution to a temporary problem. And I'm not trying to downplay, some people have real serious challenges and real serious things they got to overcome. I mean, but certainly suicide is not going to solve that problem. If anything, it's just going to make things worse. It may solve things for that individual, but certainly there's going to be fallout. And even, somebody's out there saying like, I don't have anybody that cares about me. I've got nobody. That's not true. There's somebody there. There is somebody, you just don't realize it, that, is going to need you. They're going to need your time. So I definitely think that that's something they got to think of. And the other thing is really just, it, a lot of these things are probably magnified in your head. You've got a lot of problems that they just seem so insurmountable, and there's like, oh, nobody's gonna understand this, or nobody's gonna relate to this. But there's somebody out there who does. There's somebody who's been in that situation, and there's probably somebody that's been in a worse situation that can offer some insight, some help, some perspective on what you're dealing with.
You bring up a very good point. And so for someone that is spiraling right into, that dark space, how do they stop those negative thoughts? How do they stop saying, they're not enough, or, things aren't going to be right?
Yeah. I mean, I think the tendency on things like that is really, people want to shelter themselves up, and they try to, not talk to somebody. They tend to keep a lot of things internalized. So sometimes it's really just as simple as, pick up the phone, call somebody, I know we're dealing with the shelter in place thing and social distancing, but, set up a video chat, and you don't have to dive into some crazy deep conversation off the bat, but just you keep it simple at first, just catch up, talk to them, how's your day going, and I think things from there can kind of, lend itself to that being, having, forming that relationship and really doing that. The other thing is, I think there's a lot of people that are in these situations, and they really feel like it's hopeless, and they feel that, nobody's going to care, nobody's going to listen. And I think even just looking at what everybody's dealing with right now with the corona situation, it can kind of dispel some of that. I mean, my wife is a nurse practitioner. She's dealing with some COVID patients right now, and they needed some donations for some medical supplies. And, out of the blue, we just reached out and talked to a couple of people that, we've never talked to them before. And there's no reason for anybody to do any kind of a donation. And certainly there were people out there that, shipped, pallets full of stuff for her company to use. So people are willing to give you their time and listen and do that. There's a lot more people out there that care about you than I think many realize.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. So I said 2 people originally, but honestly it's 3, right? So the person that is thinking about committing suicide, then the person that is the collateral damage, right? The ones close to them, and then the outside. So understanding that, time is valuable, and while you have this time, be caring, especially if you're one of the outside people and you see, someone looking for help, whether it's directly or, direct trauma or indirect, right? Just to be caring and open, and to not be afraid to just say you need help, right? On all capacities. So, I mean, I really appreciate how you put that. Tell us, how did you heal? How did you learn your coping mechanisms to get you through?
Yeah. So, I think the biggest thing is, for me, I try to put things in perspective. And certainly I wouldn't wish that type of thing on anybody. But then looking and saying, my problems are big. There's a lot of things that I got to deal with, but, there's a lot of people that have, they're much less fortunate, and they're not anywhere close to, there are people that literally would give anything to have my problems, right? So just kind of having that perspective, and I don't mean that in a bad way of, saying like, well, at least I'm not that guy, but it's just that whole thing of, yeah, you got problems, but you still need to find the areas that are good and be thankful for that. Because in spite of all that, I mean, like I said, now, where I am, and I've had a very successful career, and I've been very fortunate in a lot of things. And certainly, I definitely believe that God played a huge role in all of that. So I think that's something that a lot of people have to kind of, think through. And again, I get a little choked up about this because it's more about, coming on the other side of that and persevering, and reflecting on, the hardship and what it's done. That's something that, I'm just very blessed and thankful. And I think a lot of people need to take time out of their day and really take a true assessment of where you're sitting on things. Because there's a lot of people that, whatever your situation is, you've got something to be thankful for and so grateful for.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with you. Having a increase or awareness of your spirituality, and humbling yourself. Can you talk to the mental health aspect of this, right? Like, were there any treatments that you did, or that you would prefer one over the other when it comes to getting help?
Mm-hmm. So for me, I didn't have a lot of mental health treatment. I didn't do anything like that. I had, there were things where, just talking to somebody was beneficial. Now, having said that, I think there's quite a few people that they could benefit from some of that, in-depth counseling, therapy. I think there's value in some of that, and just having somebody who can, be there and help offer that. So, I don't want to speak too much about that because I haven't experienced a lot of that, but certainly I think it's helpful. I do have a friend of mine that he had gone through a very traumatic event, and it was it was a really terrible divorce. And I could see how it was really, it definitely was putting him into a very dark place. And I could see where he was, was really making some poor decisions about things, getting, really, really heavy drinking and doing a lot of things that were just pretty reckless with himself and his future. And he went and sought therapy. And I think that that has definitely been a very positive thing for him. It's built up his self-esteem. He's kind of learned to, just like I said, learn to value the things that he really sees as really important and things that he hadn't necessarily realized before. So some of the relationships that he had, some of the people that were in his life that he didn't really think a whole lot about, he had to go back and really review that and strengthen some of those bonds and be thankful that he had people around him to take care of him like that. And I think it's definitely been a net positive for that person, because now I see that he's definitely moved on and be very successful. And that's kind of one of the other things I guess I do want to touch on. I think a lot of people in these kind of situations, the first thought is they feel like they're alone, and then the second thought is they don't want to bring this up because they're worried about what it's going to do to other people, right? Like, or what's going to be the downstream effect of that? Like, oh, this is going to be bad for my career. I can't really share this kind of thing. And I think it's, your career is certainly not going to get any better by keeping this bottled up and not talking to somebody.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a really good point with the stigma. This is not the first time that I heard it. A lot of folks won't go get help because of fear of you know, what they might lose with their career, or, you know, how it's back. But that's an excellent point, that things aren't going to get better. You know, your career ain't going to take off any more than what it is.
Yeah.
If you're still stuck in this bad space. So why not get help? Right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, you know, I think even a lot of, like, you know, counselors are sensitive to that, and there are ways that, you know, they can handle some of those things. It can be done confidentially, and, you know, you're able to keep some of that. I mean, you know, just because you're going to therapy doesn't mean you got to wear a T-shirt around in public that says you're doing that. But so there are things I think that help protect some of that and defend some of that stigma. And, you know, the other piece is, now I think it's, you know, it's overplayed, right? I mean, certainly the workplace that I work at takes that type of activity very seriously. You know, they would not, you know, it certainly would not be tolerated to criticize, you know, or hold it against somebody for seeking something about their mental health. And I think even in society, we've seen where, you know, that has just turned out very poorly, right? So either, you know, the person does something to harm themselves, they do something to harm other people. You know, there's a lot of concerns about that. And I think most places now respect that. And, you know, I just don't think the stigma, certainly, I'm sure it's still there in some places, but I think there's a lot more people that are understanding about this kind of stuff now.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly the things you're doing here, Greg, is great in helping to promote that education.
Man, I appreciate that. I really do. I keep wanting to go back to what you learned, right, when it comes to dealing with, you know, grief and how you overcame it. And you have kids, right?
I don't have kids, so.
Okay.
But you know, I mean, it's not because of this. It's just, you know, we just don't have kids right now. So maybe soon.
I got you. Well, look, I mean, you got time with COVID and everybody staying there. It's gonna be a lot of December babies out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the question I was going to get to, right, was, when you do have a little one, what are you going to teach them? What are you going to teach them about preparing them for dealing with trauma and grief, you know, in their life?
Yeah. So my wife has 2 nieces, and they're really young. And, you know, one of the things that we kind of do is we're certainly trying to provide them, a good role model to see, right? And, like, you know, everybody thinks it's kind of like this weird, you know, like, you know, you don't have to be this amazing person to be a role model, right? Like, you don't have to be, you know, the next, you know, I don't know, Mother Teresa or something like that, right? Like, I mean, you don't have to be, you know, this, you know, insanely crazy person that's got all these, you know, books and movies made about them. You can just be a good person. Just set a good example. It's the little things, like taking an interest in them, you know, sharing the moments that are meaningful to them. Like, you know, it's not going to be anything huge. It's just small things that they care about. The other thing we do, I think, a lot is allow them the opportunity whenever we're able to spend time with them. We allow them the opportunity to be disappointed and frustrated. And that's an important thing to learn, because it's critical to self-esteem. You can't just have nothing but good times and, you know, just win everything, because if you have that, then the minute that they do have something negative happen to them, they haven't developed any coping mechanisms to deal with that, right? So, and I'm not, you know, I mean, these are, you know, little children, so I'm not suggesting something terrible happened to them, but, you know, if it's something small, you know, something on scale, like, it's okay if they're disappointed that they don't get the Christmas present they wanted, or, you know, they don't get what they wanted for dinner or something like that. It's all those kind of things that they have to learn. You know, in terms of, you know, the setting the example, just being in a stable environment. That's an important thing. I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping back and forth here, but you know, it's like the stable environment. You know, when at home are the children in an area where, you know, mom and dad are always yelling and fighting, because you know that creates a sense of instability. You know, when there is an argument, is it a constructive argument, or is it, you know, really heated and yelling and things are getting thrown around? Because that isn't teaching a great example to your children on this is how you should argue. It's okay to have a difference of opinion. It's okay for mom and dad to fight, and sometimes it's not bad for the kids to see some of that, as long as you can do it in a constructive manner, so they can learn, this is how to do it. This is how I can voice my emotions without it becoming my emotions overtaking me.
Yeah. No, those are all great points. So allowing, you know, them to fail to be disappointed. I strongly agree with that one, and that's one of the main reasons why I went into sports myself and why I believe in it. The skills you learn by being competitive and playing against someone else, you know, if you lose a game or if you miss a shot, you know, like you said, it's on that small scale, it's manageable, but it at least allows you to face, you know, disappointment, you know, but on a small scale, so that you can learn, you know, those skills. And I mean, there's been times where I remember playing rec football and football in like junior high and high school, and missing a tackle or missing a catch or losing a game and being very disappointed and not quitting. And then when I got to high school and into college, being in that same situation and having that flashback of, oh, I missed this one. It feels just like this. Let me make this play because I now know what to do.
Yeah. So you kind of use that failure in a constructive manner, right? Like, you know, you use the setback that you had in a constructive fashion. Right?
Yeah. So I mean, this has been great. I know throughout this we probably got choked up maybe 2 or 3 times. I feel like you want to say something to your inner self that's out there, not necessarily you, but someone that needs to hear you. So the floor is yours. Closing.
You know, I guess the thing that I would say, right, is like, things might seem like it's bad, it's terrible, and it could be made even worse because you may feel like you don't have anybody in your immediate circle that's very supportive, or even worse, might be exacerbating the situation. But it's kind of like what we just talked about, the whole idea of you can be handed a situation, a failure, or, you know, something that you don't want, and what do you do with it? If you allow it to just, you know, you could allow it to consume you and you know, just submit to that failure and have it just really make things even worse for you, or you can look at it in some constructive manner and say, well, this is what I have, this is what I got to deal with, and use that to kind of be a learning point and a lesson learned for you, and how do you move forward on things. You know, certainly when I look back, you know, when I was a little kid, and it's funny, my mother was talking about this with me the other day, like never in her dream did she ever think like I'd go on to, you know, go to a place like West Point, graduate from West Point, go get my MBA, or be working in, software. I mean, like those were things that happened to other people, not, you know, not somebody from like a single parent immigrant family. The mom doesn't even have high school diploma, that type of thing. That kind of life trajectory is reserved for people who, you see on TV and stuff, right? Like they have supportive parents and, everything's great and wonderful. And they don't have care, their biggest problem is like the cable went out or something, right?
Right.
So I think it's, it can be done no matter where, you may not get to choose where you start, but you certainly get to choose if you run the race, if you finish it, and what position you finish in. Those are all things that you have in your control. And you got a lot of, especially nowadays, with the wealth of information and the ability to reach out and access people. I can be here in Dallas, and I can talk to somebody on the other side of the planet instantly. I can reach out to anybody I want to and talk to them and get, help. And not just even around trauma, but it's just, how do I go to college? How do I do this? How do I learn about finance? How do I take out a loan? So it's all there. That's all within your control. And those are all things you can harness and use to your advantage.
Mm-hmm. I appreciate that. Are you mentoring anyone right now?
I do have there's a West Point graduate, recent West Point graduate that I am offering some mentorship to. Some of it is on, the career path and things that he's trying to figure out on his own. Nothing too radical. Certainly I would love to help other people.
Indeed. Yeah, I only ask just because, between all the things that you accomplish, I know I've found being able to give back has been my greatest joy. So I was going to ask you, what's been your greatest joy in overcoming all of this?
Yeah, so certainly that is definitely, top of mind for me is how do I give back? It's the thing of once the elevator takes you up, you got a responsibility to push the button and send it back down, right? So I try to do that where I can. I have reached out to certain people where I've seen that, they've been in a place, and just certain comments they've made on, like, social media or something like that, or things that I've heard about. So I do try to do that, but that I think is something that's very important to me. It's one of the reasons why I reached out to you, Greg. Once I saw your post, was, just trying to share a message and say, things can get better. And, not everything is, for that one person, it may not be a huge thing, right? But to them, it's everything, right? Like, I mean, we talk about it in these very, extreme terms, but sometimes it's just, you're getting, your self-esteem is getting impacted because you don't feel that you're where you ought to be in life, or you just have a bad relationship with somebody. It's your parents, or a girlfriend, boyfriend, wife, spouse, whatever, what have you, children. And it may not be a terrible relationship, but you may just not feel like it's where it should be. But to that person, it's going to be the end of the world. And there's ways to get around that. It starts by communication.
Yeah, very much so. All right, Nick. Well, I appreciate you, man, coming on and sharing your message. It's been awesome. I thank you. I know there's someone out there who's going to hear this and have some really good points to take away. Especially, the understanding that your time, your quality time is like the biggest thing, and only being able to do what is within your control. And then just understanding that, allow yourself to fail and be disappointed, and understand that it's okay, right? That it's not the end of the world with it. And you have to learn to run your own race and get back to that stable point that you want to have in life. So
Yeah.
that's all awesome, man. All right, well, everyone, this is Greg and Nick signing out. We appreciate you joining in. Stay safe, stay focused, and stay engaged.
Thank you.
That's what it's really all about. You know, giving yourself a fighting chance to just show what you got.